Hello there, AP Environmental Science class. Welcome back to part 2 of my lecture on chapter 3, ecosystems. What are they and how do they work? So we left off in part 1 of this chapter talking about the components of an ecosystem, and then the final slide spoke about soil and how soil is a very important part of many of our ecosystems. Now we're going to transfer into energy and talk about how energy and ecosystems play a role together. What happens to energy in an ecosystem? Well, energy flows through ecosystems in something we call food chains and food webs. So what is a food chain? It's a movement of energy and nutrients from one trophic level to another. We'll talk about what a trophic level is in just a second. A food web is going to be a network of interconnected food chains. Okay, so what are we talking about when we talk about these trophic levels? Well, you'll notice here, all right, the sun, that's our high quality energy. Our first trophic levels are our plants, our producers, right, who use the sun's energy to produce nutrients. Second trophic level are our primary consumers. These are our herbivores. Third trophic levels are secondary consumers, carnivores. And our fourth trophic level are any tertiary consumers, or the top carnivores. In this case, looking at a hawk, sharks could be considered that. Human beings could be considered that as well. And then obviously all of these go back to our decomposers and our detritus feeders, who then feed on the remains of the dead plant and animal matter. What's key here is that as we go from trophic level to trophic level, we once again are losing high quality energy to heat. And as a result, as we go from trophic level to trophic level, the amount of energy available actually decreases 90%. So every use and transfer of energy involves energy loss as heat. Your pyramid of the energy flow that I kind of just showed you, it wasn't in pyramid form, it was in horizontal form, but what it's going to show is that the pyramid will be on the next slide. 90% of usable energy is lost with each trophic transfer. That means you have less chemical energy available for the higher trophic levels. Biomass is just the total mass of all the organisms in a given trophic level. So here's the pyramid, all right? So what does this all mean? This means the producers, phytoplankton, right? They live in the ocean. They have 10,000 kilocalories of available energy for them. However, once you get up to the primary consumers, which in the ocean are zooplankton, those are the herbivores of the ocean. There's only 1,000 kilocalories of energy available, right? You lose 90%, or the way I think about it is that the primary consumers is 10% of what the producers was. So again, it's going to be 10% lower or 90% less as you go higher. You can think of it either way. Secondary consumers, like the fish perch, only have 100 kilocalories available. So again, 90% less than the primary consumers. Okay, or you can think of it as the primary consumers have 10, more than the secondary consumers. However you want to think about it. Okay, again, from secondary to tertiary, again, we're losing that 90%, going from 100 to 10, or you can say, the tertiary available is just 10% of what the secondary consumers' available energy was. So you can think of it either way, 90% going up or 10% if you want to look at the trophic level just underneath it. Okay, so what does that mean in the long run? What that means is, for now, I just want you to understand, as you go from trophic level to trophic level, you're losing 90% of the available energy. But what this really means is I want you to think back to that ecological footprint activity we did a couple of weeks ago. We spoke about how if you're a vegetarian, you have a smaller ecological footprint than, let's say, if you're a meat eater, right? This is why, or at least one of the main reasons why. Someone who just eats producers, plants, has so much more energy available to them by just eating that plant than if you were to eat a secondary consumer like a perch, right? So I'm a human being, I eat plants, I have 10,000 kilocalories of available energy in those plants. I then go eat a perch, I only have 100 kilocalories of energy available. So I have to eat much more perch to get the same amount of energy as I would need if I just ate plants. This is another reason why vegetarians have a much smaller ecological footprint than meat eaters. It's because we are losing energy as we go up through these trophic levels, 90%, right? As a result, or you can think of it as the top trophic level is 10% energy available as the one just beneath it. You can think of it that way. And this is why, if you're a meat eater, you got to eat much more meat to get the same amount of energy as if you just ate plants. And that's because of this, because as we go up through trophic levels, we are losing available energy, 90%, as we go up through each level. All right, just a couple of pictures for you here. This is a simplified food web in the southern hemisphere. Again, just looking at here we have fish, right? The fish eat the krill and the zooplankton, right? The penguin will eat the fish. The leopard seal will eat the penguin, et cetera, et cetera. Again, so you can look at that. That is a food chain. Food web. This is another simplified food web. This is for terrestrial species in a temperate desert ecosystem. Once again, right, this grasshopper gets eaten by this woodpecker. This red-tailed hawk will eat this squirrel, etc., etc. So there are some FRQs where they will have pictures of food webs up, and you kind of have to understand how they work. Again, kind of self-intuitive here. Of course, if you have any questions about how to read a food web, definitely reach out. Okay, moving on. Some ecosystems produce plant matter faster than others do. So now we got to talk about something called the GPP, the gross primary productivity, and the NPP, the net primary productivity of a certain ecosystem or answer a certain ecosystem. So what is gross primary productivity, GPP? This is the rate at which an ecosystem producers, okay, so we're talking about the plants, the producers, convert solar energy to stored chemical energy, and it is measured in units such as kilocalories per meter squared per year, okay? So gross primary productivity, rate at which an ecosystem's producers convert solar energy to stored chemical energy. Net primary productivity, and this is the one that is mainly used, okay, is just that. It's net. So we're going to take something away. This is the rate at which an ecosystem's producers convert solar energy to chemical energy minus the rate at which they use the stored energy for aerobic respiration. Okay, so it's kind of like when you think about your paycheck, right? It's the gross versus the net. The gross is what you make before taxes get taken out. After the taxes get taken out, that's what your actual paycheck is, right? The net is that's what gets deposited into your bank account. Well, same thing here. The gross primary productivity is the rate at which producers convert solar energy to chemical energy. Net primary productivity is that minus the rate at which those producers use the stored energy for aerobic respiration. Okay, so you're going to take those two numbers, subtract them, and that's going to be your net primary productivity. And this is the one we're going to concentrate on. Terrestrial ecosystems and aquatic life zones differ in their NPP. The planet's NPP ultimately limits the number of consumers, including humans, that can survive on the earth, right? Because this is basically, NPP is basically how much biomass, plant matter is being created. So again, if that number is small, think about the trophic levels and the food webs. We start with the producers. If that's a small number, going to be hard to keep those consumers living in that ecosystem. Next chart shows you some ecosystems, right? So this is actually a chart of NPP for major life zones and ecosystems. So what is this telling us? This is telling us which ecosystems produce the most biomass, basically, and which ecosystems are going to have the more vibrant biodiversity and things like that. Look at them. Swamps and marshes, tropical rainforest, temperate forest. Okay, those are your top three terrestrial ecosystems, when it comes to net primary productivity. Again, your higher your net primary productivity, the more consumers, okay, that can live in that ecosystem. So swamps and marshes, tropical rainforest, right? Temperate forests. Temperate forests are like what we have out here in Ardsley. We have a lot of biodiversity, right, in these areas. Look at the lower ones there, right? Look at desert scrub and an extreme desert. Your NPP very, very small. This is why we don't have a lot of large creatures living in the desert, right? Because there's very little NPP, very little biomass, producer mass being created, plant matter, and therefore you can't get the other levels, those trophic levels, to actually live in this area. Look at your aquatic ecosystems, your estuaries, right? Those are those areas between the salt and the salt water and the fresh water. Those have your biggest net primary productivity, lakes and streams as well. Think about that. The open ocean actually has the least net primary productivity when we look at aquatic ecosystems, and that's because there's actually not a lot of phytoplankton floating around the open ocean. Most of that is actually near the shores, near those estuaries. So a bit of an important chart here to understand. Again, understand the bigger your NPP, the more plant mass that is being created, and therefore the better chance that you're going to have those secondary, those tertiary consumers living in that ecosystem. Bigger NPP means bigger or more biodiversity. So again, what happens to energy in the food chain? We talked about this a bunch. Ecological efficiency is the percentage of energy transferred from one trophic level to the next. Again, I was using the 10% rule. It's either 90% going up, or you can think of it as 10% of the lower trophic level. So if I'm at the third, I have 10% of what was at the second trophic level available to me at the third. Or if you're going from the second to third, it's a 90% drop. Again, you can think of it either way. Most loss is your waste heat in these ecosystems, in these trophic levels, as we transfer from one trophic level to the next. Some energy contained in detritus and metabolic waste provides energies for your decomposers and your detritivores as well. All right, so what happens to matter in an ecosystem? So we just spoke about energy and how energy is transferred through these trophic levels. Now we're going to talk about matter. Nutrient cycle within and among ecosystems is very important. These cycles are driven by incoming solar energy and gravity, but they can be altered by human activity. Some of the major cycles we're going to talk about in this class: water cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the phosphorus cycle. So first off, the water cycle, hopefully the easiest for you guys. You've been talking about the water cycle since you were in elementary school. Another way to call the water cycle is the hydrologic cycle. And this cycle collects, purifies, and distributes Earth's fixed supply of water. Incoming solar energy causes evaporation to take place. Gravity then draws water back as precipitation. Okay, surface runoff evaporates to complete the cycle. Some precipitation also gets stored as groundwater. So here is basically the water cycle. I would understand the components of the water cycle. I believe most of you know those components already. But you'll notice some of the arrows in red are human impacts or pathways affected by humans. So again, we have our transpiration, right, from plants, precipitation, evaporation. But you'll notice the runoff part, right, can be affected by human beings. You'll notice we're also over pumping some of our aquifers, which take groundwater out of the aquifers. An aquifer is just an underground reservoir. We'll talk more about that when we get to water resources in a couple of chapters. But again, some of the red is where humans are messing with the cycle. But again, all in all here, you guys know this cycle. Definitely understand the hydrologic cycle. Again, water cycle sustains all life. Ways humans alter the water cycle. We just spoke about it a little bit, withdrawing large amounts of fresh water at rates faster than nature can replace it. Clearing vegetation, again, which increases that runoff and decreases the nutrients as the soil gets runned off. And the draining and filling of wetlands for farming and urban development, right? Not only do wetlands provide flood control, not only do wetlands absorb and hold overflows of water, but those wetlands were where we saw our high NPP, right? Our largest NPPs. So we're going to talk about that more in an upcoming chapter. But when you're filling in these wetlands for farming and urban development, you're destroying biodiversity because, again, these wetlands are where we have that high NPP, which can sustain all the different forms of life. Next cycle we'll talk about is the carbon cycle. Carbon is the basic building block of carbohydrates, fats, proteins, DNA, and other organic compounds. Photosynthesis from producers remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then aerobic respiration, either by producers, consumers, or decomposers, add that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Also, some of the carbon dioxide is dissolved in oceans and actually stored in marine sediments. Here's your carbon cycle. Again, I would understand this, and I would also make sure you understand the red. Again, that's where we are affecting the carbon cycle as humans. So again, let's take a look at some of the cycle here. Again, animals and their respiration, right, put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Photosynthesis, okay, takes that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And again, through the process of a diffusion, you will have that carbon dioxide dissolved in the ocean, dissolved in some of the limestone sediments on the bottom of the ocean as well. But what are humans doing? We are, with transportation and burning fossil fuels and deforestation, we are increasing the amount of carbon dioxide that is heading into the atmosphere. And as a result, we are messing up with this cycle that has been great for millions of years. But in the last 150 years, these reds from us have become so large that we are messing up with the carbon cycle, and that's why we are getting a bit of a runaway greenhouse effect, or again global warming here on planet Earth. Again, a greenhouse effect is good. What we're producing is a runaway greenhouse effect because of the red here. We are putting too much carbon into the atmosphere compared to what naturally occurs, and that is, of course, messing up the entire carbon cycle and not allowing enough carbon to get sequestered. Sequestered means to be taken in out of the atmosphere by either the trees or the ocean or whatever. There's too much in the atmosphere, so the ecological services on planet Earth that sequester this carbon are being overloaded, and that's why we have excess carbon in the air, and that's why we are warming. Again, human has disrupted the carbon cycle. We're adding large quantities of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere at a faster rate than natural processes can remove. Levels have been increasing sharply since about 1960. Result: warming atmosphere and changing climate. And we actually do the last chapter in the class actually we will devote to global warming. Again, clearing vegetation reduces the ability to remove excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So again, just keeps more and more and more of this carbon in the atmosphere, which again warms up the planet. Next cycle we'll talk about is the nitrogen cycle. The nitrogen cycle uses bacteria. So useful forms of nitrogen are created by lightning and specialized bacteria in the topsoil and bottom sediment of aquatic systems. This useful form of nitrogen is then used by plants to produce proteins, nucleic acids, and vitamins. Bacteria convert nitrogen compounds back then into nitrogen gas. Once again, though, we're altering the nitrogen cycle by burning gasoline and other fuels. We create nitric oxide, which can return as acid rain. By removing large amounts of nitrogen from the atmosphere to make fertilizers, we are messing with the nitrogen cycle, and adding excess nitrates to aquatic ecosystems also messes with this cycle. Human nitrogen inputs to the environment have risen sharply and are expected to continue to rise, again disturbing the cycle. So once again, a great picture. I would argue these three, actually going to be 4-1 because we're going to do the phosphorus cycle next. These four graphics that show the water, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycles. My advice, know them very well because they're important and they're very succinct. It's right out in front of you. They do a very good job of explaining these cycles. So once again, nitrogen in the atmosphere, okay? Electrical storms can actually get that nitrogen back into the soil as ammonia, which can be used. Nitrogen fixation by bacteria can produce nitrate in the soil, which again can be used by plants, right, to produce plant matter, okay? That then get decomposed as animals eat it and the plants eat it. The plant and animal matter gets decomposed, and the bacteria in the soil once again turn it into useful nitrogen for the plants to use. Okay. The problem is, again, you see the big red lines here. We're putting fossil fuels or inorganic fertilizers into the atmosphere. Too much nitrogen in the atmosphere. We have nitrates from fertilizer runoff and decomposition going into our oceans. Excuse me, guys. Let me go back there real quick as we're taking a look at this together. Okay, again, going back into our oceans here. So once again, understand this process, understand the nitrogen cycle here, and again, understand where we as humans are disrupting yet another cycle here on planet Earth. Final cycle we'll talk about is the phosphorus cycle. The phosphorus cycles through water, the Earth's crust, and living organisms. Their major reservoir is in phosphate rocks. This is a very slow cycle. Okay, we're talking about millions of years for the phosphorus cycle to pretty much cycle itself out, right? Human activities and impacts. We clear forests, removing large amounts of phosphate from the earth to make fertilizers, and erosion actually leaches phosphates into streams, which we don't want. So once again, understand the chart here. Okay, here's your erosion. Phosphate dissolves in water. Plants producers may use a little bit of the phosphate in feeding, right? Phosphate in shallow ocean sediments in our food webs. But then again, understand where we are impacting it as humans, right? Mining waste, sewage, fertilizer, for instance, increasing the phosphates out there, and once again, messing up our natural cycle here that has been working perfectly for millions of years. Last couple of hundred years, we as humans have been affecting the water, the carbon, the nitrogen, and the phosphorus cycle. So again, understand them, understand these charts. If you need help, definitely reach out and we can talk about it a bit more. All right, final part of this chapter just talks about how scientists study ecosystems, methods of study, field research, actually going into forests and natural settings, obviously laboratory research, also mathematical and other computer models can help us with the study of ecosystems as well. Scientists will also use aircraft, satellites, GIS software, GPS systems to track where animals go, etc. We can model ecosystems and populations under laboratory conditions. Simplified systems will control temperature, light, humidity, other variables, and then support that laboratory research by actual research in the field. And again, those mathematical models can help simulate ecosystems, just another way to study large and complex systems. All right, so that concludes my lecture on Chapter 3, Ecosystems. What are they and how do they work? And as always, thanks for listening.